Hello and welcome to Default Assault, where we take on everything by default. I am your host, Demosthenes, and with me, as always, is Mr. Kyle Nash. How's it going, Kyle?
Quiet! You'll learn the ways of Cobra Kai today, Demosthenes.
Yes, we're in training, and in fact, to celebrate the success of Cobra Kai, I have worn my 80s shirt, and somewhere on here, I'm looking at this upside down, somewhere on here, there he is Mr. Miyagi. No Daniel-san, but I got Mr. Miyagi I'm representing.
Hey, you know, at least there was some way, another picture represented by way of this series for Pat Morita. I have to tell you, I was practicing my quiet a lot to imitate Lawrence in Cobra Kai, because that seems to be his go-to move, and be damned if it doesn't work a lot, but I digress.
So the YouTube series Cobra Kai, which is a brand new sequel series to the 1980s hit The Karate Kid and its various sequels, it's become surprisingly successful. And well, Kyle and I sat down to watch it and see if it was really as great as everybody keeps saying. And I'll be honest, my reaction to it was somewhat shocking. I was very impressed with the show. I have some problems with it, but we'll be delving into it tonight. Kyle, you've been a fan of the Karate Kid movies, right?
I enjoy them. I tend to enjoy at least the third one more than you. I know that. The first movie, of course, is listen, Karate Kid's that thing that is definitely one of those things, I should say, that's definitely very directed and directly affected by nostalgia at this point. It's popular because it was child 80s goodness, okay? But I'll be damned if you start listening to You're the Best Around and it doesn't get stuck in your head. Bro, I have solved problems at my day job coding SQL queries. I'm like, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do. I put on my music, The Best Around comes on, and be damned if I don't code Johnny Lawrence into a corner, okay? You know, there's a lot of stuff in there that when you watch, Karate Kid isn't necessarily a cinematic masterpiece, but there are many moments in it that are very memorable and very well executed, frankly.
Well, it was directed. I mean, it was it's kind of like a version of Rocky for teenagers, and it was directed by the same director who did Rocky. In fact, he did the first.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Both. I mean, he did the first three movies, and the original Karate Kid and Rocky, if you were to compare the stories, they have lots in common. And I really liked the first one. I was never a huge fan of it, but as a kid of the 80s, I love my montages. I love my 80s synth pop score.
You know, really the biggest difference that might have actually made the movies exactly the same is that trip we take into the identity of the trainer. Mm-hmm. We don't know a whole about Mickey, played by Burgess Meredith. I don't know that he would have as interesting a backstory as somebody who is like Miyagi was, not just air quotes a foreigner, but somebody who fought in the American military on the correct air quotes correct side, and you know the whole thing with his wife and the tragedy therein and all that other stuff. Miyagi, you know, is a very deep character, to your point, even though he spends most of the movie going, "Oy," you know, that, I mean, yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you bring that up, because Miyagi, I mean, that was really what one of the biggest distinctions outside of the sport, of course, and the ages of the characters. That was one of the biggest distinctions from Karate Kid and Rocky, was that the focus on the relationship between mentor and student. By its very title, it suggests that. But he's also a very different character than Mickey. Mickey is loud. He's cynical. He's acerbic. Miyagi is the polar opposite, quiet, reserved, with a very tragic backstory, but he still gets into the action, unlike Mickey, who is at a point in his life where he cannot. Maybe that's a source of his cynicism. That's a deeper conversation for an eventual Rocky episode, possibly required viewing. We'll get to it when we get to it. But that was one of my fears going into Cobra Kai, because to me, when I think of Karate Kid, I don't think of Ralph Macchio. I don't think about the kid in question, the titular kid. I think of Pat Morita.
Yeah.
going into this, knowing that he's passed away, he can't be in it, I was wondering if they could fill such a significant gap and make a gripping story. And damned if they didn't do it in the smartest way by focusing on the anti-hero.
The Miyagi character still lives on by way of his teachings. No different than in real life where, stuff you still do today was taught to you by your parents, a school teacher, someone else in your life. And to really capture the lesson aspect was the best way to not only pay homage to the character, but to make Daniel-san believable as something other than a damn kid. Because let's be honest, I know Ralph Macchio is way older than me, but the dude still looks younger than me right now.
I mean, the fact that the Karate Kid Part 3 was still called the Karate Kid and he was in his 30s. I mean,
was he really?
Yeah, he was born in 1961.
Holy
Yeah, he was in his 20s when he did the first one, which is understandable because a lot of the teenage, high school-centric movies of the 1980s, and still to this day, star 20-year-olds and so forth. But yeah, I think they were pushing it by the time they got to Part 3 and he was still a kid.
It still worked. That's wild. It's wild.
But, that's the thing. He still looks very young, and the fact is that I think that his look and overall demeanor actually work in its favor in this show because
so much.
Oh yeah. Because I'll be honest, if this show was focused on Daniel, I don't think there's no way it would have been nearly as successful. In fact, I understand that they're kind of representing the duality and kind of seeing Daniel from Johnny Lawrence's point of view. It does add a comedic turn to their interactions and their interplay, but in many ways it's kind of like as I grow older and I kind of see the older films and see kind of where Daniel's path goes on, his path is the least interesting, I believe.
Well, I would argue that Daniel, the character, in a lot of cases exists to move the plot of the other people around him. He is definitely a passive protagonist. He's not particularly likable. Okay, you can see why the kids want to beat up on him. But what I find very interesting is, and let me go to the Cobra Kai side because the show is called Cobra Kai after all. What not only does Ralph Macchio's look maintaining to be a baby face, let's just call it what it is, help the representation of LaRusso. Johnny Lawrence is the actor that plays him. His name I don't remember immediately.
William Zabka.
Thank you, sir. Has not aged quite as well, and to see that deterioration, air quotes, is then easier to sell as you see the struggles that Johnny Lawrence has come to realize. But listen, and as somebody who is an athlete in his past, for those I've heard people say, "What, this one tournament could kind of ruin your life and send you on a downturn?" Yes.
He kind of has this Daniel Craig kind of vibe to him. He may not have the pretty look, but he has a power behind it, a gruffness, dare I say down to earth quality about the character that his look complements the character very well.
We'll just say he has a gruffness, but I wouldn't. I see what you're groping for with Daniel Craig. Yes, I agree with the gruffness point you're making, but he's ugly Daniel Craig. That's kind of mean, but okay, I see what.
I don't think he's that bad looking. I mean, he's...
No, I'm joking with the ugly thing. Yeah, no. Hey, listen, they're out in California. He used to live in Encino. Everybody's kind of pretty, but next to LaRusso, he's the ugly guy at the club. Let's just call a spade. All right. I would totally hit on Daniel-san.
Well, in terms of sex appeal, I think that Johnny Lawrence definitely has it. I think there's something to be said about that kind of look and that kind of character and that kind of he doesn't have the self-confidence, but he exudes that self-confidence.
Yeah, which is just an odd mix for a character. It's a great call by you, and by the same token, he's handsome enough that when he interacts with his ex-wife in the show, who herself is kind of a looker for her age, you get it. Spoilers, bitches. Spoilers.
Well, before we actually delve into the specifics about the show, the highs and the lows, there's been a recent craze of the nostalgic revamp. We have seen it with Will and Grace. We have seen it with Roseanne. We have seen it with Fuller House. And I do admit that when we first started Default to Saw a year ago, I contemplated doing an episode about Fuller House. After seeing a few episodes, I decided that you've never committed a crime harsh enough to justify that punishment. And that was at least my initial fear of going into the show. Coupled with the fact of the lack of the late Pat Morita. And I was, as I've said before, I was pleasantly surprised. Yes, there's an all nostalgia at play. The entire first season plot arc is an inverse of the first film. So there's definitely a lot of nostalgia there. There's perhaps one too many flashbacks, if you ask me. But it handles it very well because unlike something like Force Awakens, which is almost a beat-for-beat remake of A New Hope, this one does subvert your expectations. It sets up the initial setup, but then it goes in a different direction. And the presentation of the Johnny Lawrence character, I found to be fascinating.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. And actually, listen, let me be as blunt as possible on this show. Okay, I don't want to be so bold as to say I wanted to hate this show, but I wanted to hate this show. Okay, I am sick of this nostalgia bullshit. Fuller House, don't get me started. Boy Meets Girl, really, I get it. Topanga's hot, stop it.
Girl Meets World, yeah.
The point is this, guys. I wanted to hate this show. And you know what happened, Demos, is I watched the first 2 episodes. And then I watched the rest of the episodes. Those last 8 happened in one night. Why? Because the end of the every episode, I'm like, well, I gotta know what happens now. What the shit, So at the very least, it did enough to hook me and keep me interested. And there were certain things in it that I didn't necessarily agree with conceptually, but were still well executed. For example, Daniel-san on the teaching side of the wax on, wax off. That was nice. So many little things and callbacks from every different direction. We talked about this in production meeting that there's so many callbacks, but they range from the obvious to, here's a picture of Miyagi again. Oh, Mr. Miyagi's little trees with successful business model. Durka. And right down to the detail of certain third-party characters, specifically in this case, the kid that turns out to be Johnny Lawrence's son. We already did the spoiler bit, just so I'll say it. And Daniel LaRusso's pupil. He's kind of a third unaffiliated party. Kind of like Terry Silver was in Karate Kid 3. And while that guy is while he's acting like the bad kid, he also wears that shitty ponytail like Terry Silver would as well.
Well, the entire bonsai tree plot came specifically from Karate Kid 3.
Excellent point by you. Well stated, Demos. Yeah, and that maybe I'm looking too much into it, but even a detail that minute as this kid getting his little shitty ponytail at the times when he's misbehaving, but by the end of the show, he's going that bowl cut action. Listen, man, somebody did that on purpose.
I think the callbacks that worked best were the ones that kind of poked fun at the original premise, such as I think one of my favorites is when Miguel, which is the initial student protagonist, when he's asking, hey, is there a particular way I need to clean these windows? And he's like, I don't remember exactly what the return phrase was, but it was more like, I don't give a shit, just clean the window.
No, that's very legit. It's like, how should I clean the toilets? Yeah, do it on your knuckles.
Well, that does kind of bring about something that is a bit unusual about the show, especially in today's let's just say a politically correct culture, is the fact that it does push some boundaries, I think that's what really hooked me in that first episode. It didn't feel like something like, I can't compare it to Fuller House because that is, just watching the show is going to give you type 2 diabetes, but it it didn't talk down to its audience. It respected it kind of the same way the first Karate Kid did. It wasn't a film for kids. It was a film for teenagers. When you see Daniel getting beat up, he's getting the shit beat out of him while characters are cursing at him at the same time. There was a watching it as a kid and going through high school, and I was always the new kid, so I was always the one getting attacked. I think I connected that film because there was a level of honesty behind it, and I think that this series kind of echoes that in its own way. It doesn't pussyfoot around current forms of bullying and how to truly stand up to it.
Yet, by the same token, it has a very strong message about inclusion and the bullying piece. Cobra Kai essentially becomes a tool of inclusion, where you have characters ranging from Latino to Latino fit men, young men or boys, to having there's a girl in there who's of a less than ideal body type that goes in and probably kicks more ass than a lot of people. And it works for her, and she kind of comes out of her shell with it. And it's a point of contention early on. And then all of a sudden, if Miguel is the top pupil, which he definitely is, Aisha, I think was her name, she's second. Hawk does it his own way and embraces the identity in a way similar to Tyrion Lannister. Sure, Tyrion Lannister isn't kicking ass and all that, but he gets the haircut to do the thing. Lawrence calls him Hawk instead of Lip, which obviously was insensitive, but he's getting them to realize this is what's going to happen in life. And then he gets the back tattoo and just makes it a whole thing. Now, you can argue that some of it goes too far with some of the Cobra Kai characters, but I think that's part of the conflict that Johnny feels towards the end.
That's actually one of the things about it. He gave them this great power, but he didn't imbue responsibility, because it's the one thing that he himself as a character up to that point is lacking.
Uncle Ben would have been pissed.
more or less. And it's something I understand, because once again, when I was in high school, I was always the new kid. Every time I went to a new school, I was immediately the target. I was this weird, this Greek guy with this foreign sounding name. I was far quieter in high school, so I had people, constantly trying to beat the shit out of me. And I try to do things the right way at first. I went to guidance counselors. I went to everybody else to solve my problem instead of me solving it myself. And it wasn't until I fought back and stood up for myself and, through that gained self-confidence that I became a much stronger, more driven individual. And it's not that I'm a proponent of saying, go out and punch people. Strictly, I've always maintained use violence for defense, which is very much the mantra of martial arts. But it is something that it is a message, and nowadays is considered wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up the political correctness aspect. To me, that was going to be the biggest challenge for Johnny Lawrence is that aspect. They portray him as an old dude that knows jack about newest trends. Like, he doesn't know anything about Facebook and all this other stuff. He doesn't email or text. He's writing a letter to his estranged son, all this other kind of bull. And so he's used to like, hey, what are you doing, Lip? And like talking schmack and making fun of people and being politically incorrect. But the message given is people. I'll tell you what, if you're somebody who supports safe spaces, you were probably triggered watching this show. Now, as many praises as we're throwing at this, what I will tell you is I feel like episodes, let's call it about 7 or 8, at about that point, they have okay, so there's 3 steps. There's A, where we get started. There's B, which is a question mark, and then C, profit. So we know that A, we got to have LaRusso and Lawrence in conflict in some way, and we know that their pupils have to face each other in the All Valley tournament. How do we get there? And there's some gold stuff in there. There is nothing. I really thoroughly enjoyed the most complete flip scripting, if you ask me, between LaRusso and Lawrence. is the hearing regarding the lifting of the ban over Cobra Kai. Because Daniel LaRusso is completely aggressive while Johnny Lawrence is uncharacteristically cool and calculated. And it goddamn works. And the way that scene is portrayed, I believe that shit could have gone down that way. So well done. Probably my favorite exchange of the show. Not to say that the tournament scene was bad, but there were certain things that I felt like had to fit a certain way. And you saw them coming because, they don't know if they're going to renew this thing. Well,
that was the biggest handicap of this first season.
Correct.
Is the fact that they had to finish in the writers' minds. They had to finish with the competition, and unfortunately, I think that that cut a lot of the stories and where it was building short. There are some character turns in the last 2 episodes, specifically Miguel, yes, where it was accelerated to the point where it did not land correctly. It just came across as very, very forced just so they can get to that tournament.
Right. I feel like that could have been, the steps were there, right? I forget Daniel's daughter's name off the bat, but the part where he knocks her over, first of all, that whole party aspect, I get what they were trying for. I just don't think it worked.
It was pretty much the exact same scene from the beginning of Karate Kid at the beach.
Yeah. Okay. I just don't think it worked. What I think would have been a better delivery is to do something to show rage building up during the tournament. The first step in imitating the crane kick to mock LaRusso while he's watching by his sensei's command, that's a great step 1. They needed to do other stuff to make him seem and get more enraged, to where, like they did with Daniel earlier in the show, where the rival car dealer is talking so much trash that Daniel karate kicks the damn boba cup out of his hand.
It has a lot of issues, or there are one too many callbacks for my taste. In the first 2 episodes, I accepted it, with the exception of Miyagi, because I felt like that was a bit of a necessity.
That wasn't callback, that was tribute. No,
exactly. As the show went on, I think they took it too far. They had to, they're walking through the old hotel and they have to show slow motion replays of that, of the young Macchio walking into the same hotel. I think by that point, it happened one too many times for me.
Well, it was episode 6 or something. Yeah.
That was like episode 8, I think, but regardless.
Might have been. And what did we also say was around the time it started a fall week?
Exactly.
Right. So, but I think there are too many homages that actually went well to really cite that as a major failing point.
I'm not saying it's a major failing point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. So
no, it's far from a make or break. I'm just saying, like, does it keep it from being something greater? Yeah, perhaps, but
I can see why you would think so.
I think that the artificial acceleration of the story itself in the last 2 episodes is what earns the greater demerits. This kind of fills the space for me for MASH vs. Evil Dead being canceled. It was just like perfect timing. I have my 80s replacement here. No Bruce Campbell, but I'll take.
That count? Macchio, does that count?
I'll take Zabka over Macchio. He has much more in line with Bruce Campbell.
Fortunately, both. I mean, damn it.
But overall, you would recommend the show.
God, begrudgingly I do. I mean, listen, the way they did the next Karate Kid and trying, oh, look, it's a girl doing karate. It was so obvious. It was cheesy and dumb. With the way they have her daughter being versed in karate, granted, she's not a major performer in it, but they do hint at it going into season 2. That makes her an interesting potential storyline. Her daughter is not overbearingly annoying, yet she's flawed enough to be a compelling character. That really could have been a huge failing. And while she isn't necessarily, air quotes, great, she does move the show along in a very wise way. One other thing I wanted to put on the spin that Cobra Kai puts on the Legend of Cobra Kai itself is, since Johnny Lawrence's Cobra Kai is essentially a coven of, air quotes, losers, his words, not mine, that eventually evolves into this badass dojo fighting force, right? You have to wonder if Johnny Lawrence's sensei didn't do something similar. And let me tell you where I get that from. When you watch the first episode, some of those dudes are just damn awkward looking. They look like kids who are awkward. They kind of look like outcasts anyway. Like the one guy who shouts at during the match in the original karate, somebody find a body bag. It's so goddamn obnoxious. And this kid looks like he has the look of somebody who would be picked on and would result to violence to defend himself. He looks like he's just obnoxious and odd, and maybe it's not his fault necessarily. Kind of like you would come to find out that Lawrence is kind of a dick because, well, he was surrounded by male figures who were dicks. Didn't realize just because you have one doesn't mean you have to be one, right? And so did Lawrence's sensei bring up him and his people with that concept of taking a coven of losers and then making them feel value in themselves? Then when they commit the crime of only managing second place, he does the shit that he did in the parking lot that not only ends the first movie, but begins the second. That's some mind-bending shit. This makes Lawrence's sensei an even bigger villain than you could have possibly imagined. And let's be honest, throughout the Cobra Kai series, they are taking giant mammoth-sized shits on his character. You might even argue now that there's plenty of evidence for it to be warranted. And maybe we'll see going into season 2 based on his appearance at the end of the show.
I can't say one way or the other. That's not the impression that I got. And if anything, I think that might be one of the things that, as the story goes on, that actually might separate the two, or it might confirm the two. We'll see as it goes.
That's what I'm looking to have happen. Is I'm not saying that's definitely going to be for a fact happen, but it's either going to, like you said, can separate or converge the two generations of Cobra Kai dojo. I would only say the only air quotes flawless character that seems to exist is something right out of the sitcom that we've hinted on in the past. LaRusso's the dumb father, and his wife is the all-knowing spouse. She is the air quotes perfect character. But
she's the closest, but she even has her issues.
I don't know what those are by looking, but hey, that's okay.
Well, there are her constant conflicts with inter-family conflicts with the mother and so forth. Their entire family dinner being erupting in chaos, and then cutting to Zabka's family dinner, which is peace and crossing barriers.
No, that's a great juxtaposition by you. I do notice that I do appreciate that you pointed that out. But let's call a spade a spade. Me personally, I put that more on Mrs. LaRusso than I do Daniel-san's wife. I'm just saying.
Well, also one last point about that. Okay, yeah, we on one side we have the dumb father, but on the other side we have the alcoholic, neglectful mother. It doesn't once again doesn't paint broad strokes. It hits it hard on both ends.
That's true.
Yeah, I would recommend it. Would you recommend it enough to subscribe to YouTube Red?
No. No. I would recommend the show. I would recommend it that in the sense that it is worth the trouble of going through setting up the free monthly trial. But I don't know that YouTube Red is long for this world. It would need to do a lot more quality stuff than just Cobra Kai.
All right, YouTube Red, the challenge is on. Let's see you at the next tournament. And that pretty much does it for this week's episode of Default Assault. Make sure to check us out every single week on Thursday for a lot more fun on hilaritybydefault.com, on Twitter @defaulthilarity, and now also on Facebook and Instagram, Hilarity by Default. Kyle, where can we find you?
Of course, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram @theSOTG, and you can find me on Facebook as the Student of the Game. I will be releasing another writing soon as well on bluehqmedia.com. And folks, the Sports Fans Guide to Nerd Culture will be back up and running around the release of Solo. And that piece is going to drop on Blue HQ Media and Hilarity by Default on the 24th. As I said, I'm very much against the production of this nostalgia crap that keeps getting thrown out there. But if you're going to do it like Cobra Kai. I'm just saying.
Totally agreed. All right. Well, that about does it. And remember that life is hilarious by default.